The papers piled around the lab made very little sense to Andy. This was not a good sign. Thankfully, the ambulance had come just in time to help the victims of Harrison's postal attack, but that just left so many questions to be answered. What made Harrison snap in the first place? Why did he steal evidence dealing with the Cupid murders? And what was wrong with his face? Andy continued to sift through the papers looking for answers, clues, anything to keep him from walking into the hell of a mess that was the rest of the police station. Frustration and stress got the better of him, and he swiped the remainder off the desk and onto the floor. The tired detective plopped himself into a chair and leaned his head back. His hands patted over his pockets before finally landing on the chest pocket of his shirt and flipping out his Zippo lighter. It had been a while, and he promised himself he'd quit. But damn it, he needed this to think straight. He placed his emergency cigarette between his lips and flicked the lighter. "You really shouldn't be smoking in here," Jason said, picking the papers up off the floor. Andy took a long drag from the cigarette, savoring the feel and flavor of it. "Arrest me." "Funny, if anyone else catches wind, they just might." "Have you been out there? It is quite literally a crime scene," Jason responded, leaning against the desk. "Then shouldn't you be out there, CSI?" "Well, yeah, I should be. I don't have a clue what I should be doing when I'm out there. I'd be more used to you in here doing..." Jason's eyes searched the room at the scatter of papers and broken glass. The cabinets were all pulled open and fridges pulled from the walls as well. It looked as if the entire place had been ransacked, but by the person who should rightfully know where everything was. What are you doing in here, exactly?" "I don't know," Andy responded, taking another long drag from his cigarette before putting it out on the desk in front of him. "I'm looking for any evidence as to why Harrison would have snapped or where he went. The guy's not Cupid. He couldn't be." "Could he?" "Harrison does know the ins and outs of the human body. The guy could remove a heart from someone, or multiple people," Jason said, reaching for an answer from the lab around him. "Okay. And that's a means, I suppose, but no motive. Why would he want to kill kids that we found? Why in the world would he want to kill the Mr. Homeowner?" "But you said that Homeowner was probably stepping out with Jane Doe. Maybe he was like, projecting anger because of his affair." "Affair?" Jason was shocked. "You're kidding, right? Everyone in the precinct knew about that. He'd even brought his girlfriend back here a few times. I think he was working up to a divorce with his old lady." Andy scratched his head. "And you think that made him snap on this latest murder? But what about the other Cupid killings, the ones from a year ago? Were they all having an affair?" I don't know. You're the detective, man. You tell me. I just analyze the crime scenes." Jason threw his hands up in confusion. "Okay." Andy leaned back in his chair, looking up at the ceiling. "The last killings were done in couples. Let's just say your theory here has any ground. They were killing people who had affairs, taking hearts or stealing hearts like a Gimberling, like you said. Maybe Cupid sees himself like a protector of love, and he's been doing this for forever or something, but he stops. And Harrison picks up where he left off. Now, if that's the case, then where exactly would Harrison even be And he stopped, and the smug smile faded from his face. Jason immediately sensed that he was onto something, but the color draining from the detective made him worried. Andy hurriedly pulled his phone from his pocket and made a call. "Yeah?" Andy didn't respond to him. He just stared intently and redialed the number each time that he got voicemail. "Andy, what's going on?" "Shut up." "Andy, what is going on?" Jason yelled back, worried and annoyed. "God damn it!" Andy slammed his phone onto the desk, cracking the touchscreen and standing up. "We're going. Come with me. I'll need your help." "Where? What's happening? Talk to me." "My wife. I think he's after my wife." Twigs and leaves crunched under Hobo's feet as he moved swiftly after Cece through the woods. His small, furry dog bounded after him. The trees and foliage were thick, but he wasn't about to lose sight of Cece. Every few bounding steps, he would see a wisp of her white hair as she slipped behind the trees, or he would see the movement of a gray hoodie as she would leap over a fallen log. With every movement, he grew closer to her. The dog behind him yipped and growled in continuous attempt to stop him from his pursuit. It sensed that nothing good could be happening here, and nothing could be done to stop Cece, while she had those puppet strings on her mind. Cece stopped dead in her tracks. Hobo noticed the change so suddenly that he stopped as well. It was as if someone had pressed pause on her, and she was mid-stride as she stood in the clearing of the woods. Her body relaxed, going limp, and took a more normal state of standing, and her eyes moved skyward. Hobo also looked at the top of the trees to see what she was looking at, but found nothing but the clouded night sky and the thick knot of tree branches. Cece slowly changed her direction and walked towards the edge of the tree line. Curious, ignoring both the pull of his dog at his pant leg and ignoring the buzzing noise in the back of his mind, he followed her through the trees and out into the opening, into the backyard of someone else's home. This house was well kept, and Hobo Heart came to realize he did recognize this place. Cece, or whoever was pulling at Cece's strings, had led him back here. Lost in his thoughts, he realized that he no longer knew where Cece had gone. But he did see a heavy-set man entering the house. Maybe this was the target of Cece's new heart. Maybe she was coming to her senses, and she knew how to set herself free. Hobo was hoping for the best, and silently crept closer to the house. But behind him, from the woods, yellow eyes watched intently. The front door to the house creaked open, and Andy cautiously walked in. "Renee?" Andy's voice was shaky, and he wasn't sure why. He'd come here in the hopes that he was wrong, but all the lights in the house were off, and the whole scene was eerily quiet. Jason stepped in after him as well, with a flashlight in hand, and let his fingers snake towards the light switch and flipped it on. The room was bathed in light. Surprisingly, everything was where it should be. Not a single item out of place, and Jason's body relaxed at the sight. He placed a hand on Andy's shoulder to reassure him, but it brought no such comfort to the detective. He knew his home, and something was wrong. Why hadn't Renee responded? "Renee? Are you asleep?" he called again, realizing the futility of the question. Where could she have gone, he thought, not wanting to let his mind wander to the worst possible option. "Hey, she's probably asleep. It just..." Jason's voice trailed off as the detective reached into his pocket again to try and call his wife's cell phone. Buzzing from the phone could be heard from the entryway further down the hall, further down into the darkness. "Bedroom?" Jason said aloud. "See? It's probably nothing." "And why isn't she answering?" Again, the voicemail picked up. "Renee, answer me!" And he called louder into the darkness and withdrew his weapon from his shoulder holster. Seeing the man's reaction, Jason did the same. The two men very cautiously and as silently as possible continued out of the light and into the darkness of the hallway. And he called the phone again and again. The buzzing echoed down the hall that the men traversed. The door to the bedroom was foreboding. The sounds of squishing and movement behind it, and the ignored buzzing of the vibrating phone led Jason to another conclusion. He held out his hand and lowered his weapon to signal Andy to do the same before opening the door. The detective ignored him and grasped the handle. Jason stopped him from turning it. "Andy, I don't know what you're expecting to find, but I don't think it's here. Last thing you want is a crime of passion, man. I won't let you. Let go. I'm not going to, not until you put your gun down. Jason, there could be a madman in there. If not Cupid, then something just as bad. Now let me do the shooting, man. If you're wrong and I'm right here, I will arrest you. Don't make me do that. I mean, this is your shit, man. Your wife, I get that, but this isn't how we deal with it." Andy's fist turned white from his grip on the doorknob, struggling with himself and Jason's hand on his wrist. The detective looked at Jason, and in the limited light, he knew Jason could see the fear and anger on his face. And he knew if he was right, there was a man behind this door threatening his wife's life. He could potentially lose her forever. But if he was wrong, and Jason was right, there was still a man with his wife behind that door. She was already gone. And he holstered the gun and released the knob. Thank you. Just remain calm. No matter what, okay? Jason held his gun at his side, more concerned with what Andy's reaction would be than what he would find behind the door. He turned the handle, and with one swift motion, threw open the door. Harrison hated the taste of copper, but he had to be whole again. He just had to, and if that's the case, he needed what little was left of what he came from. That didn't make eating David's heart any easier, though. The taste was always the worst part of this. It was much harder to finish with onlookers, however. Andy and Jason stood in front of the open door, with their mouths hanging agape. "Jesus Christ, Harrison! What the hell are you doing?" Jason yelled, only then realizing what he was witnessing. Harrison sat smiling with the last few bits of David's heart in his teeth. His eyes shined with a yellowish glow. Jason, in a fit of panic, yelled and raised the gun towards the crazy doctor and opened fire. 3 holes were ripped through the doctor's face and chest, but his eyes never faltered. Harrison stood from his position on the bed and licked the last remaining drops of blood from his face and hands. "Jesus Christ, Harrison, what the hell are you?" Harrison walked smiling, blood oozing from his wounds, closer to the 2 men. Jason placed the end of the gun against Harrison's chest. Andy's eyes, however, never left his wife. His mind raced to analyze the scene that was in front of him. He tried to piece events together in the way that he thought would make the most sense. This psychopath must have choked his wife in a twisted act of justice and killed the man here. He ate his heart and became the Cupid copycat. This was him. It had to be him. "Harrison, you're under arrest for..." Jason attempted to speak in a shaky tone, but was cut off when Harrison's smile opened wide and bit into Jason's throat. Jason sputtered and fired his weapon in a panic. The bullets exploded from Harrison's back with bits and pieces of muscle, bone, and organs. The yellow glow of his eyes faded, and the full weight of his body fell onto Jason, clenching his teeth tighter. As Harrison fell, taking Jason to the ground with him, the remaining flesh tore away to expose the blood and gore underneath the skin of Jason's neck. His hand came to his throat to close off the wound, and he choked and coughed in his own blood, but it was no use. "No!" came the sound of a woman's voice from deep in the shadows. The figure of a woman with bones painted or tattooed over her entire body came running into view. Cece had been waiting for that right moment to take the heart from this man, just as she was instructed, but now Cece dug into the man's flesh through the bullet wound. Shredded strips of blackened hearts were pulled out and slapped onto the ground. Cece angrily screeched at the body on the floor. Put your hands up. Put your hands on your head, lady." Andy had drawn his gun and pointed the barrel directly at Cece's head. He had become lost in this horror show. If Harrison had been the copycat, then who was this? Why was she here watching him? Were they working together? But when she turned her face, the painted skull and bones were revealed by the moonlight, and the words came creeping back into his brain. Gemberling, I just lost my wife. And my friend here, I'm not going to ask you again. Put your hands on your head. Cece's face twisted with frustration and anger at her failed task. Andy was in the wrong place at the wrong time. She held her hand over the gun, and Andy pulled the trigger. A hole the size of a quarter ripped through the creature's hand, but she didn't mind the pain. She hardly felt it, and pulled the gun from the man's grasp. She pinned him to the wall by his throat. Her grip was inhumanly strong. Andy's hands flung to it to futilely fight for any breathing room. Her other hand found his chest, and her fingers put pressure over each rib, pushing them to the point of near breaking beneath his soft flesh. "Do you value your heart?" she asked. If Andy could breathe, he wouldn't have answered. Crunch! One rib snapped under the pressure, and her nails began to penetrate his flesh. The pain was unbearable, and the world around him grew dark. The woman's fingers dug deeper now, and with each wriggle of a digit, the detective's vision blurred to the point of black and white smudges, with just a hint of yellow. Behind Cece, Jason stood with his gun at the ready. Andy was never happier to be able to see that his friend and fellow officer was all right. But how wrong he was. Jason, blood oozing from the nasty-looking gape on his throat, smiled with glowing yellow eyes and placed his pistol against Cece's back. Cece's grip loosened from the shock, her eyes widened, and with a flash and a bang, Andy was bathed in blood from the Gemberling. A hole far larger than Andy assumed possible from Jason's pistol was open in Cece's chest, and the gray of her hoodie became soaked red. Andy was dropped to the ground along with the twitching and dying woman. He coughed and gasped for much-needed air to fill his lungs again, and despite the horrors that he'd seen tonight, he was glad for it to finally be over. That is, until he heard the gun chamber the next bullet. Looking up from the ground, the detective watched the smiling Jason aim the pistol in his direction. All the while, Jason continued to smile. Just like Harrison. Jason, calm down, man. It's me. And he attempted to choke out the best he could, but Jason didn't answer. He didn't seem fazed at all. At his pant leg outside of the detective's view, blood from Harrison's body traveled across the floor up the CSI officer's leg and into his body towards his heart. With it came one of the spirits that Hobo had released a year ago, searching for more death and more to hurt. It wanted as much blood as it could get from as many bodies as it could find, and right now it found Andy. Jason, please. Please don't do this, man. Please. Bam! The gun went off again. Andy raised his hands and clenched his eyes tight to cover his face in a pointless attempt at keeping himself alive. But what more could he do? No pain or burning from the impact the bullet hit him. He opened his eyes again to find Jason firing down the hallway towards the back of the house. Bam! Another muzzle flash, and the detective saw what this monster was shooting at. Another Gemberling. This one with wings opened wide from its back, charging the thing that had possessed Jason and swiping the gun from its hand. Shot after shot rang from the drop gun, deafening Andy, but he was able to see the Gemberling's mouth wide open with a yell as the bullets tore into his flesh, through his face, and almost as instantly, the open, bloody wounds reclosed. The Gemberling's hands closed over Jason's face, blinding him, but never ending his smile. As Andy watched on at the horrors before him, a figure amongst many others creeped from the woods and through the broken window in the detective's bedroom. It crept over to Cece's body that now lies still. The shadowy figure with yellow eyes rolled her over, and through the wound created by the gunshots, it dug into Cece's chest to remove her heart. Hobo, seeing the monster halfway through its task, tried to release his grip on the spirit possessing Jason, but he couldn't. Jason reached up with both hands and held Hobo there. "I have it!" screeched the creature, and it darted out the window. Jason laughed wildly. Crunching, wet and loud and bloody were all Andy could hear now besides the ringing from the gunshots, as Hobo pulped the skull of the possessed man with nothing but his bare palms. Brain and bone oozed out from between the creature's fingers like jello, and yet the body continued to fight on, the smile still remaining across the lower jaw that remained of Jason's head. With a swift jerk of the bone that Hobo now grasped, even that too came free of Jason's body. And finally, the decapitated corpse fell, no eyes left to shine yellow. Hobo, hands dripping with viscera and breathing heavily, looked to the detective on the ground, and then to Cece. He stepped over the fallen man, ignoring him, not worth the fight or time, and instead picked up the fallen Gemberling. He looked at the hole left in her chest, touched where her heart, or his heart, had been taken from her, leaving this bloody mess, and she touched his cheek. He stood with her and carried her to Renee's body, and there, he took Renee's heart from her chest. He slowly and gently placed the heart into Cece, and he removed strands of Renee's hair. With it, he crudely sewed Cece's wounds shut, and after a moment, Cece opened her eyes. Hobo brushed her hair away from her face. "Hobo," Cece spoke with a tone of voice he remembered so fondly. "You're free now. And this'll do. But you'll need another." Hobo said with a tear rolling down his face. In shock, Andy remained in the hall, fumbling for his phone and eventually, with a shaky hand, pulled it from his pocket. With a swipe of smeared blood, he dialed emergency services and listened for the ringing. Hobo Heart, carrying Cece in his arms, stepped from the room again and looked down to the detective in the hallway. Their eyes met, and Andy knew what had happened in that room. He closed his eyes tightly. He knew he was a loose end at this point, and he had to be tied. But when he opened them, the Gemberlings were gone. The room was dim and calm. A voice on his phone answered, but Andy, bleeding and broken, had no idea what to tell them. Jason's fingers twitched. "I'm sorry. She is freed. You broke the hold you had on her. But now, 4 of the 6 remain, and they have both the Gemberlings' hearts."